Welcome to the Homeschool High School podcast, brought to you by Seven Sisters Homeschool.com and the Ultimate Homeschool Podcast Network. I'm Vicki, and I'm so excited to introduce some new curriculum from Seven Sisters Homeschool. I don't know if you guys are like me, but I love fantasy, I love myth fantasy, and I love fairy tales. And so, fairy tales is one of the good starting places for young people who want to move into reading and writing more of the myth fantasy kinds of projects during their high school years. So, recently, Seven Sisters Homeschool has released some middle school curriculum that even some high schoolers would really enjoy. One is a literature study guide for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum. Now, a lot of you guys are like me and have seen The Wizard of Oz, old black and white and color movie from back in the 40s. And we loved that movie, except for the really scary flying monkeys. It's just such a good fairy tale kind of story. Now, some of you may not have thought about that being a fairy tale. And actually, we have a quote by L. Frank Baum, on what fairy tales were to young people. So he says that folklore, legends, myths, and fairy tales have followed children throughout the ages. For every healthy youngster has an instinctive love for stories, fantastic, marvelous, and manifestly unreal. The winged fairies of Grimm and Anderson have brought more happiness to childish hearts than all other human creations. Then he goes on to say that, some of the old fairy tales have some really horrible and blood curdling incidents that were devised by the authors to point out a fearsome moral to each tale. And when you read those original fairy tales, some have some really gruesome stuff that happened. So, what L. Frank Baum wanted to do was to create a modern time fairy tale that had less of the blood curdling incidents, and more of the delight and interest. And so he says, having this thought in mind, the story of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was written solely to please children of today. It aspires to being a modernized fairy tale in which the wonderment and joy are retained and the heartaches and nightmares are left out. So, I mean, we did have the flying monkeys in the movie, but compared to some of the old fairy tales, it's not quite as blood curdling. So you think about what goes into a fairy tale. How can young people learn to recognize a fairy tale, enjoy it, and then go on to write one? So we'll talk about that in a moment. All right, so here's some things that make a fairy tale a fairy tale. So, one, it usually begins with once upon a time or something similar to that. It usually ends with something like they lived happily ever after. So that happy ending kind of thing. The time and the location are not specific. It does contain magical elements, like tornadoes that whisk your house off to the land of Oz. Contains groupings of threes and sevens, presents good versus evil. It involves talking animals or objects, demonstrates a moral of some kind, and usually there is some kind of royal feature. There's a person of royalty in that story at some place. All right, so part of what the literature study guide does for our middle schoolers who read through The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, they will analyze The Wizard of Oz to decide what's fairy tale and what's not. What are the differences and similarities between traditional fairy tales and modern ones? And the guide is written in a way that is no busy work, so we're not killing the book. Young people gain some literature analysis skills, but we don't over analyze, because what we want is our middle schoolers to learn to love reading all kinds of literature and to move into high school still loving to read, and then graduate from high school still loving to read, because their learning and their analysis skills have not killed the books. They've only enhanced the books. So Seven Sisters Homeschool Literature Study Guides teach a little bit of literature analysis and lots of fun with each guide, so that the goal of loving reading and over time depth of literature analysis goes with the teens year to year into life. So let's start in middle school with the wonderful Wizard of Oz doing some fairy tale reading. And when they finish reading The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, that's a great time to write their own fairy tale. It is an accessible thing. Teens think, those little the 13-year-olds, the 12-year-olds might think, I can't write a fairy tale. But you know what? They can, especially with the Seven Sisters Homeschool Writing Guide. As you know, if you've worked with our guides before, a concept of writing is, again, no busy work. We're not trying to kill the project. We want young people to learn to love writing, to have confidence that even if they don't want to grow up and be a great writer, they can write anything they need to set their minds to, anything that comes before them in college or out in the world. They can do writing, and they may as well have some fun with writing and discover the creative parts of their brains. So, with the Seven Sisters Homeschool Short Story Writing Fairy Tale Guide, young people learn a step-by-step process for writing their own fairy tale. It's not overwhelming. What happens is, as in all Seven Sisters guides, they have a weekly assignments broken down day to day. So this is what you do today. This is what you do the next day. So each week, they're very clear daily assignments that are doable. We're not expecting young people to spend hours a day on this project. A few minutes each day, and before they know it, in a few weeks, they have this delightful fairy tale that they created themselves. Isn't that cool? When our young people who never thought they were creative at all have done the Seven Sisters Homeschool short story writing projects or the poetry projects, what they have reported to us again and again is, I didn't think I could do that. I didn't think that was going to be fun. And when they get through, they discover they are way more creative than they thought. And if they can be creative and have fun with some writing, maybe they can be creative and have fun with some other things that are artsy out there in the world. You never can imagine what is in the heart of your children that God might like for them to unlock it during their middle school and high school years. So if you have a middle schooler who is ready to read a fairy tale, an L. Frank Baum modern fairy tale. So it was not written in the 21st century, but compared to the ones that were written hundreds of years ago, to delight in a early kind of fantasy story, then get The Wonderful Wizard of Oz along with the Seven Sisters Homeschool Literature Study Guide for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz. And then follow that up with the Middle School Guide to Short Story Writing about fairy tales. And again, if you've got a high schooler who is interested in these things, it is totally okay for them to do that, even though the word middle school is on there. Like, it is not dumbed down in an insulting way. It is just written for young people in that age demographic, and then older ones that may want to just explore something that's fun, like a fairy tale. So anyway, the Seven Sisters Homeschool Literature Study Guide for the Wonderful Wizard of Oz by L. Frank Baum, and the Middle School Guide to Short Story Writing Fairy Tale are available now at sevensistershomeschool.com. I hope you guys will download them and really have some fun this year. There will be links in the show notes for those listening to the podcast. Those watching on YouTube will put the links in the comments. You guys have a great day. Hey, if you've got any questions, join the Seven Sisters Homeschool Facebook group. It's such a wonderful group of seventh sisters who can answer your questions. We have the loveliest answers we get from all the different moms and dads who are homeschooling out there. So, by the way, there are seven of us, seven sisters, six of us that work together as a team. And who's the seventh sister? You are. So join me and Kim and Marilyn and Sarah and Allison and Stacy, and you be our seven sisters. Join us over there at Seven Sisters Homeschool Facebook group. Also on our Instagram, TikTok, and subscribe to Seven Sister Homeschool Substack and get a weekly how-to article because it's fun. Substack's such a good resource. Okay. God bless to all of you guys. We'll see you next week. Thanks to Seth Tillman for editing. Have a great day.